My daughter called on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Christmas, while I was still wiping down the counter at the bakery. I'd just pulled the last tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven, and the whole place smelled the way it always does at this hour. Butter and brown sugar, and something underneath it that I've never been able to fully name, something that takes 40 years of the same walls and the same ovens to build into a room. I set the cloth down when I saw her name on the screen. "Mom," she said, and I could already tell from the first word. There was a brightness to her voice that was rehearsed. That particular lightness people use when they've decided something and are hoping you won't make them explain it. So this year we've decided to do Christmas at our place. Craig's parents are flying in from Phoenix, and it just makes more sense to keep everything in one location. You understand. It was not a question. I stood in the middle of the bakery I had opened in 1984, the one my mother helped me paint before we unlocked the doors for the very first time, and I told her that yes, I understood. She said we'd get together in the new year. She sounded relieved before I'd agreed to anything. "Have a good Christmas," I said. Then I hung up. I finished wiping the counter. I covered the rolls. I turned off the display case lights and locked the front door and sat at the small table by the window, the one I've eaten lunch at alone since Roland passed 7 years ago. Outside, Main Street was dressed up for the holiday. Garland on the lampposts, a wreath on the hardware store across the street. The barber shop had one of those electric candles in the window that's been there every December for as long as I can remember. I poured 1 cup of tea from the pot I keep behind the register. I didn't cry, not right then. 31 years I had hosted Christmas. The year my mother was first diagnosed. The year Roland's back gave out in November and he spent most of December flat on the living room floor. The years when my daughter was a teenager who wanted to be anywhere but at the table. I had put out the good dishes anyway, made the standing rib roast, baked the pecan pie that had been in Roland's family since before I knew him. The house always smelled right. The table was always full. And now I had been asked, politely and efficiently, not to come. I drove home the same route I always take, past the post office and the volunteer fire station and the old Miller property at the edge of town where the fence has been falling down for 15 years and no one's fixed it yet. I parked in the driveway, unlocked the door, hung my coat on the hook where it always goes. The house was quiet in the way houses get when they've held a great deal of life and are in between holding it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't sit down and write it all out in a journal. I just made dinner, watched the news without hearing it, and went to bed. Christmas came and went. I opened the bakery on the 26th, as I always do, because people want something warm the day after a holiday. Something that smells like someone made it for them. Nettie, who has worked beside me for 22 years and has forgotten more about bread than most people ever learn, brought a small poinsettia in and set it on the counter without a word. That was the kindest thing anyone did for me that week. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed the way they always do. Slow mornings, familiar faces. The comfort of routine, which I have come to understand, is its own kind of grace. Then on the 28th, the bell above the door rang at 10:30, and I looked up and it was my daughter, and her husband Craig was right behind her. She was smiling in a way I recognized, not a dishonest smile exactly, but a managed one. Craig had a manila folder tucked under his arm. He shook my hand the way he always does, firmly like a man at a business meeting. He has never called me Mom. He has always called me Josephine, which I have always found cold but never mentioned. I offered coffee. They sat at the window table. I stayed standing. Craig opened the folder and did a small clearing of his throat. He laid out what he called an opportunity. He had connections at a development group, Harmon Realty, expanding their portfolio, and these were interested in this block. The bakery building plus the 2 adjacent lots could anchor a mixed-use redevelopment. Ground floor retail, residential above. Boutique, he said, elevated. The Halcott's name could be licensed, the recipes packaged and sold as a product line. And you wouldn't have to manage any of it, he said. That's the whole point. You've worked hard for 40 years. This is the part where you get to rest. My daughter reached across the table and touched my hand. "We just want you to be able to enjoy your life, Mom." I looked out the window at the street, the lamppost, the wreath that someone had forgotten to take down from the hardware store. "And me," I said, "where would I be in all of this?" They exchanged a look, not surprised, coordinated. My daughter said they'd already looked into some options. There was an independent living community in Kellerton, about 20 minutes away. "Very nice," she said. "My own apartment, good amenities, close enough that they could visit regularly." I nodded slowly. "Let me think about it," I said. They left the folder on the table. Craig shook my hand again on the way out. My daughter hugged me and held it a breath too long, the way you hold on to someone you've just done something to. After they drove away, I went to the back. I don't often go into the small office behind the kitchen. It's mostly for filing and for quiet, and since Roland reorganized it the year we expanded, it's always been exactly as he left it. The cabinet against the far wall, the shelf above the narrow desk, the framed photograph from opening day in 1984, where my mother and I are both squinting into August sun, flour on our aprons, looking happy in the specific way of people who don't yet know how much they're about to work. I stepped in and felt it immediately. Not wrong exactly, just not right. The second drawer of the filing cabinet, the one with the original lease, the business registration, the first property survey, was not fully closed. I have closed that drawer thousands of times. You have to push it twice because of how it sticks. It was not pushed twice. I opened it slowly. The folders were there, but they were out of order. The business registration was behind the insurance packet. The lease agreement was flipped the wrong direction, facing out when it had always faced in. I looked at the shelf above the desk. My mother's recipe tin, a big old copper thing, dented on the left side, with a lid that takes two hands and a specific angle, was exactly where it has always been. But the lid was slightly off-center, a thin crescent of darkness at the edge where it hadn't been seated properly back down. I hadn't opened that tin in months. I lifted it down and set it on the desk. I removed the lid. Inside were my mother's original recipe cards, her handwriting small and slanted, the cards stained with batter from decades of actual use, and beneath them an envelope I had never put there. My mother's handwriting on the front, just my name, Josephine. Underneath, in smaller letters, "If it ever comes to this." I sat down in the desk chair and opened it carefully, the way you open things that matter. Inside was a letter and a set of legal documents, clipped together with a small binder clip. The letter was 2 pages. She explained that 26 years ago, when I refinanced the building and did the expansion, she had quietly arranged something with her own attorney. She had established a trust in my name, sole trustee, sole beneficiary, with a specific and binding restriction. The bakery, the property, the business name, and all associated assets could transferred, commercially leased, or restructured in any way without my written, notarized, and witnessed consent. Not by a spouse, not by an heir, not by a court order brought by anyone other than me. She didn't tell me at the time, because she said she didn't want me to spend years looking over my shoulder. She just wanted me protected. The notary seal at the bottom of the legal documents was dated February 1997. I sat in Roland's old desk chair with the papers in my lap, and I thought about my mother. I thought about her at 62, younger than I am now, sitting across from an attorney somewhere in town, doing this as quietly and carefully and without a word to anyone. I thought about all the things people do for you that you only find out about later. I placed everything back in the envelope. I carried it to the front and locked it in the small metal box I keep below the register, the one that holds the daily deposit until I take it to the bank. I kept the key on my own chain, right next to the original key to the bakery's front door. The one my mother pressed into my palm on the morning we opened and that I have worn every day since. The next morning, I called Frank Devereaux. Frank is mostly retired now, tending his garden and fussing over a very old tabby cat, but he still answers his own phone, which I've always respected. I read him the trust language. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. "Your mother was a careful woman," he said. "She was. Bring me the originals this afternoon." I want certified copies filed with the county recorder before the week is out. If someone has already done a title search on this property, and by the sound of it, they have, I'd rather you be in the record first. I drove into town after the lunch rush. He reviewed everything at his desk with his reading glasses low on his nose, nodding at intervals. Before I left, he added a new provision to the existing trust language, a clause specifying that any legal challenge on grounds of my incapacity would require the opinion of 3 independent physicians of my own designation, not anyone else's. That last part was my idea, he said simply. I thanked him. He waved it off. Don't come back empty-handed next time. I brought him a loaf of rosemary sourdough 2 days later. He looked genuinely pleased. 4 days after that, they came back. Craig arrived with 2 men I didn't know, one from Harmon Realty and one who introduced himself as a property attorney. They came in at opening time before the morning regulars. My daughter was with them but stood near the door, arms folded against her chest, not quite meeting my eyes. The attorney placed a stack of papers on the counter. He said their title search had turned up no encumbrances on the property. He said a voluntary cooperative arrangement would be the most straightforward path. He used the word transition 4 times in under 5 minutes. He used the phrase "at your stage of life" once, carefully, in the context of a commercial property requiring more active management than a single person could reasonably sustain. I let him finish every word of it. Then I reached below the counter and unlocked the lockbox. I placed the certified copy of the trust on top of their papers. This was filed with the county recorder's office last week, I said. The restriction has been in place since 1997. Nothing transfers without my written, notarized witness consent. I haven't given it. The attorney picked up the document. He read. His expression went very still in the way that expressions do when someone encounters something they weren't told to expect. Craig said they could challenge it. I looked at him evenly, then challenge it. I came around the counter and held the front door open. The Harmon man gathered his papers first. The attorney followed without a word. Craig stayed a moment longer, jaw set, deciding whether to say something worth saying. He didn't find it. He turned and walked out. My daughter was the last one on the sidewalk. She had on her good coat, the camel-colored one she'd owned for years. She looked, in that particular moment, younger than she has in a long time, like someone who had been following instructions she didn't entirely believe in and was only now beginning to understand what that had cost her. "Mom," she started. "Drive safe," I said. She nodded. She got in the car. I closed the front door behind me, soft and even, the way a door should close when it means something. Not a slam, not a performance, just the plain quiet fact of it. Nettie came out from the back with a full tray of morning pastries, looked at the empty storefront, and looked at me. "Anything I need to know about?" "No," I said. "Let's get the window case filled before the regulars start coming in." She set down the tray and began arranging without another question. I have always appreciated that about Nettie. The weeks that followed were the quietest I can remember in years. No calls from my daughter. No unfamiliar cars in the lot. I fixed the dripping faucet in the back sink. I ordered the new proofing rack I'd been putting off since the fall. I repainted the daily specials board and was surprised by how steady my hand was. I thought about my mother most evenings. I thought about her placing that envelope in the tin, pressing it beneath the recipe cards, replacing the lid just so, and then going home and never mentioning it. She had been nearly my age when she did it, maybe a year younger. She had done it alone, without asking for anything in return, simply because she had looked ahead and seen something I hadn't. Because love isn't only warmth and presence. Sometimes it is the thing you quietly arrange for someone before the problem has a name. In late February, on a gray Wednesday morning, my phone rang. My daughter. She had been crying. I could hear it in the first breath she drew. "He left," she said, 3 weeks ago. I didn't know how to call you." I sat down at the window table. The street outside was empty, just the post office truck making its slow morning rounds. "Are you safe?" I asked. "Yes." A pause, then, "Mom, I'm so sorry." "I know." I kept thinking he had a plan, that this was good for all of us, and I let him talk for too long. She stopped. I let the quiet sit between us, not as punishment, as space. I know, I said again. She asked if she could come see me. I said yes. I told her Saturday morning was good, when it was slower and we had room to breathe. She arrived just after 9, no folder, no prepared speech. She ordered a coffee at the counter like any other customer, and I smiled at that before I thought to stop myself. We sat at the window table. I had made my mother's almond pound cake, 3 bowls, a long, slow bake, that warm marzipan note at the finish that always surprises people who've never had it before. We didn't try to settle everything that morning. Some things take more than one conversation. But we talked, and it felt honest in a way it hadn't been in a long time. The kind of talking where neither person is managing what the other one is about to say. She asked about the recipe tin, about what I'd found inside it. I told her about the envelope, the trust, my mother's handwriting, the notary seal from 26 years ago. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, "Grandma knew." She always knew, I said. She was just patient about when to say so. My daughter looked through the pass-through window at the tin on its shelf. "I didn't realize she'd ever been in your office." "Neither did I said, until someone else was." She had enough grace not to say anything more to that. We finished the cake. I refilled her coffee. The light was flat and pale through the front windows, the way February light is when winter isn't quite ready to let go. Before she left, she asked if she could come back sometime. Not for any particular reason, just to be here. "Of course," I said. She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. She stopped waiting to be assigned something and started simply paying attention to what was there. She learned the rhythm of the morning. She figured out how the espresso machine liked to be handled and how it didn't. She noticed on her own that the 15 minutes after the rush ends is the window for cleaning the steam wand, miss it, and the milk residue best, and the whole thing has to be soaked. One afternoon in March, while we were restocking the afternoon shelves, she said, "Do you think about what happens to this place, eventually?" I kept working. "What do you mean?" "When you're ready to, I don't know. Hand it to someone, do something else." I set down the tray I was holding and looked at her. "Nettie knows this bakery the way it deserves to be known," I said. "She knows the vendors, the accounts, the way the back oven runs cold on the right side on cold mornings. She's been here long enough to have earned what she knows." My daughter nodded. She was thinking carefully. "And what about me?" I asked. She looked around the room. At the worn wood of the counter, the hand-lettered menu board, the brass light fixtures. Roland had hung himself one long weekend in the 90s. The crack in the far corner of the ceiling we'd sealed twice and never quite matched the paint on. At the whole of it. At what it actually was, not what it could be converted into. "I think I want to learn it the right way," she said. "If there's still room for that." "There's room," I said, "if you start now and mean it." I picked my tray back up. She picked up hers. That evening after closing, I stood in the back and held the copper tin in both hands for a moment before setting it on its shelf. I thought about my mother standing in this same room the morning we opened, pressing key into my hand, squinting into the August light, covered in flour and entirely happy. I thought about everything she had put in place without ever asking me to notice. I set the tin down. I turned off the kitchen light. At the front door, I took the key from my chain and held it in my palm. The original, the worn brass one, the one that has opened this door every morning for 40 years. It felt lighter than I remembered, not because it mattered less. Because for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was carrying it entirely alone. I locked up and walked to my car in the cold March air, same street, same lamppost, same town it had always been, patient and unhurried and entirely mine. The bakery would open tomorrow. It had always opened tomorrow. And that, I understood finally, was not a small thing to be able to say.